Part 1: Pre-Revolutionary Russia. In the Siberian wilderness of pre-revolutionary Russia, Dr. Yury Zhivago endured the heavy winter winds with the thought of his recently deceased mother-in-law hovering in his mind. Recently returned to his native land, Yury had once been a successful Moscow physician. However, the Bolsheviks had confiscated his practice, possessions, and the only family he had left. The son of a well-to-do engineer and his French wife, Yury was raised in Moscow, spending part of his childhood in Italy, where his mother was from. At a young age, Yury was taught the same principles he would later preach to his daughter, Tanya: to treat others with respect and to never be cruel. From his father, he learned the importance of lifelong service to society, an ideal which would come to define Yury's life. After college and medical school, Yury moved to Ufa, a coal mining town in the Urals. Here, he opened his own medical practice and married his childhood friend, Lara. The pair had 2 children, the beautiful Tanya, and Yura, who was born with a defect and required extra care. Though Yury and Lara had a deep love for each other, the problems of pre-revolutionary Russia eventually caused their marriage to unravel as they frequently argued over politics. Yury found himself in the middle of the revolution, first joining the Whites in their fight against the Bolsheviks, then distancing himself from the conflict altogether. To keep his family safe and ensure that his children didn't grow up in a war-torn country, Yury decided to take them to the safety of the Siberian wilderness. Along the way, they stayed with a peasant family, whose hospitality and honesty made a lasting impression on Yury and shaped his future decisions. Once in the Siberian wilderness, Yury was slowly accepted by a small village of peasants and slowly built a successful medical practice. Here, he and his family waited for the revolution to end and for life to return to normal. Ultimately, when the Bolsheviks won, Yury and his family were sent home to Moscow. Part 2: Life in Moscow. Returning to Moscow, Yury and his family lived in poverty and faced harassment from their new landlords, who were formerly their servants. However, Yury still held faith in his socialist ideals and stayed on to practice medicine in the newly established Bolshevik healthcare system. His popularity in the medical community, coupled with his medical treatments, soon led to Yury becoming a respected doctor among Moscow's Bolsheviks. This marked the beginning of his ascent within the new ruling class, and Yury started to be invited to gatherings of Bolshevik elite, and for a time, he even managed his own private medical practice. Despite his increasing success, Yury still found time to help the helpless. He took in refugees from the Civil War and frequently offered medicine to them for free. He also owned a sanatorium in the countryside, where he often treated patients who couldn't access medical care in Moscow. With his growing fame, Yury also began publishing his poetry and medical articles. Part 3: Revolution Meeting Romance. Eventually, Yury crossed paths with his first love, Lara, who he had left behind in Ufa. By this point, she had been married and divorced and was now living in Moscow with her daughter-in-law, Sonya. To Yury's surprise and misgiving, he found himself drawn to Lara. Though he tried to fight his feeling for her and maintain a strictly professional relationship, events quickly spiraled out of control when Kornikov, Lara's obsessed admirer, began to threaten and harass Yury. In desperation, Yury and Lara sought out help from the Communist Party in a desperate attempt to shut Kornikov down. With Kornikov out of the picture, Yury and Lara could finally be together, and the two began a romance which would last for years. Meanwhile, Yury's family life was also growing as his son, Yura, graduated from medical school and was soon married to Sonya. This would prove to be a short-lived happiness, as Yura and Sonya's marriage dissolved after 2 years and Sonya moved away. Part 4: Years of strife. The years of suffering and violence continued, and Yury turned to his beloved Lara for the peace he so desperately desired. As the Communist Party became more oppressive and the people of Russia increasingly agitated, Yury and Lara tried to create a safe haven in her cottage by the river. But before long, their short, tranquil peace was shattered when Yury was arrested and sentenced to a forced labor camp in the Gulag. He was held as a political prisoner for 5 years, but still managed to write poetry in his spare time. During this time, Lara did everything she could to keep Yury's name in the public eye, and her tireless campaigning was eventually successful. and he was released after 5 years of detention. Part 5: Post-revolutionary Russia. With the war ending and Bolshevism slowly vanishing from Russian society, Yury and Lara finally had a chance to settle down. The pair moved to a farm outside Moscow, and Yury continued his practice as a physician. Meanwhile, Yury also started working on his masterpiece, a long poem novel called Dr. Zhivago. With a newfound sense of freedom, Yury finally finished the novel and sent it off to be published. Unfortunately, the novel was deemed too critical of the Soviet state and was banned in the Soviet Union. This led to the persecution of Yury and Lara, and they were forced to flee the country. The couple eventually ended up in Paris, where they lived out the remainder of their days in exile. Yury, who was now an internationally renowned author, continued to write and publish poems, and his long-awaited magnum opus Dr. Zhivago was finally released in 1957. In the spring of 1959, Yury passed away from a heart attack and was buried in Paris, never to return to his beloved Russia. Despite the fact that he never lived to experience the success of Dr. Zhivago, Yury's legacy lives on through the novel and the lasting impact of his uncompromising theories and characters. Yury left behind a lasting legacy both in art and life, and his story still inspires generations to come.